loud. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We have a lot of folks in the room, which is really exciting. We love being able to do these in this hybrid format. It's so great to have all our panelists like together in the space, and then also to have all of you here with us to be able to like interact and makes it feel a little bit more real. So we really appreciate all of you here in the room and of course, everybody on Zoom. For those of you online, to let you know, there is closed captioning available on Zoom. You can press the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to turn on captions. I might have to turn that on in a second. Yeah, this is our last Friday forum of 2024. For our series this year, we're exploring what it means to build strong communities. We've done that through conversations on health equity, youth mobility, and housing density. So today, we're discussing affordable housing density and how we think about housing strategies. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the forum. For folks in the room, you should have gotten a piece of paper when you checked in at the back table. If you didn't, let one of us know. We'll make sure you get that and we'll collect them towards the end. For folks on Zoom, please use the Q&A function on Zoom at any time. You don't have to wait to get your question in. I want to give a really big thank you to the Office of Community Partnerships at University of Washington Tacoma for allowing us to use this space and do this in a hybrid format. We're really, really appreciative. And with that, I want to introduce our moderator, Tanisha Jumper. Tanisha is the Chief Communications Officer for Tacoma Public Schools. So Tanisha, go ahead, take us away.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, there we go. So glad to be here with you and so sad that this is our last forum for the year. For those of you who do not know me, this is probably my 8th or 9th year hosting this series, and it's one of my most favorite things each year. Today, I am excited because I see a lot of friends in the room and I have a lot of friends on the panel. So it is going to be a quick conversation because there's a lot to say about the topic. I do want to give a quick disclaimer that housing and density are really complicated, multifaceted, multi-strategy things. And so if anybody came here hoping that they were going to leave with the answer, spoiler, you will not. But we have some very, informed and people here to talk about it, and we're just going to have a really great conversation. But I do want people to understand that the one thing you can do about housing and housing density is to be informed. The solutions are varied. Depending on what part of life you're in, what your financial situation is, if you own properties, don't own properties, all of those things impact how these strategies and ideas will land with you. And so just want to put that out there when we start and know that you're going to hear a lot of great things. But this is really the challenge for the next, 10, 20 years for our communities and for the United States in general. So with that, I will jump right in because we got a lot to cover. And I'm gonna ask my friends and panelists. We have one person who's gonna come in at some point. He's just gonna jump in the conversation, and that's Jeff Dade. And so when he gets here, I'll pause and let him introduce himself. But we're gonna get this ball rolling. So I want you to do your self-introduction and tell us what's your connection to the topic of housing. And Nick, I'm gonna start with you.
Hi, so my name is Nicholas Carr. I work for Tacoma Housing Authority. I do the intergovernmental affairs management. I started my career, I think, pretty much at this institution in 2012. I have 2 degrees from this fine place. And I worked in Derek Kilmer's office for about 6 years post-graduation. And that's where I started my kind of understanding around housing and policy and figuring out what I want to do with myself. After that, I moved on to a nonprofit, Forterra, and worked on some of the housing issues through supply and materials there with my colleague Jeff Dade, who will join us shortly. and then moved on to Tacoma Housing Authority after that. So the connection I have to housing most specifically now is that I work for a housing authority in the city of Tacoma, but it's a little bit lengthier than that. It's been a subject of interest for me for a long time, from the time I was with Kilmer to now, and also living and renting and now owning in this area, both an experienced human in the housing market here, but also through policy and kind of trends that I've seen from my professional career.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon. I'm Anaid Yerena, she, her, ella. I am a resident of the Central Neighborhood District here in Tacoma. I am an immigrant. I migrated to the United States from Mexico. I am also a member of Latino Unidos of the South Sound, group of Latino folks that organize an annual festival and also work to promote the incorporation of Latina into the community here in the South Sound region. I'm an architect, housing advocate, and I also teach here at UW Tacoma in the School of Urban Studies. I will end with my connection to the region by saying I'm also in ALF, or was in ALF class of 29. So happy to be here.
A less packed panel today, so
Yes.
they got the three senior fellows and the soon-to-be fellow, so it's great. So let's just kick it off. We're in a housing crisis in Tacoma, and that means different things to different people. So from your perspective, what does that actually mean for real people living in Tacoma to be in a housing crisis? Anaid, do you want to start?
Happy to do so. So to me, a housing crisis is observed whenever we see community members that are unhoused, whether we know them personally or not. Anyone living under a bridge or in our shared spaces is doing so out of need, not out of the desire to occupy that space. And so whenever we observe in our neighborhood that that's happening, it's a very clear indicator, and maybe like a late indicator of the housing circumstances that we are experiencing in the region. I'll pass it on to Nick, and I might add something after you go ahead.
Thank you. When I think about the housing crisis here in Tacoma and what it means for people, it's easy to conceptualize the baseline, which is we have a limited or dwindling supply or limited supply of housing units for people to access that we need for the population influxes that we've seen or that we're going to expect in the future, coupled with rising costs. At its base, people's wages are not increasing with the inflation of materials and services, and so housing is a part of that. As costs, both from a rental standpoint, go up, but also operational and maintenance costs, as well as building costs, all rise. And when wages don't rise at the same level, you have a delta there where people cannot afford the units, but also the units become more expensive to maintain and operate. And if you are not able to charge a rent commensurate with that need, then you have housing that then also starts to functionally fail. And in that case, if you coupled with the inability for people to pay rent, you have again you have a gap there that can't be made up. And so the housing crisis at its baseline is, for me, is that. So how do we functionally build in a way that allows us to maintain that housing, or how do we provide enough subsidy or resources on the back, on the front end to ensure that people have access to housing, or the people who build and maintain housing have access to that capital. And I see Jeff walking in.
So I think that's, interesting. And I think to kind of piggyback on what Anaid had said, there's a lot of people that believe that, people are unhoused because they made bad choices or because they or choosing that. And the data actually bears out that there's a direct correlation between the cost of housing and the number of people that are homeless. And there isn't a direct correlation between the number of people that are homeless and things like drug use and all of those other things. And so I think we can see Tacoma at some points has had some of the highest inflation in housing in the country. And I don't know if any of you know that number. If you do, you can jump in. But I think it was like 16, 17% in certain areas of Tacoma. And and wages haven't raised in that same way. And so I think what I hear when I was doing strategy at the city was we have all these properties and all these apartments are going up. And there's vacancies in those apartments, so we can't possibly have a housing crisis. And I'm going to pause real quick and welcome Jeff to the panel, and I'm going to let you jump in on this one. And when you do, you can introduce yourself and tell people where you're from. But that idea that because there is a vacant unit anywhere in the city means that we don't have a housing crisis. And can you kind of speak to that, Nick?
Yeah, so when the supply issue, so it's dual, right? So there are at times vacant units in the city, but again, if you don't have access to either the resources you need to functionally get into that unit, then you still are on the street, whether there's a unit available or not. And part of the issue that we see when there are units that are available is that there is an expectation that either an owner of an apartment building or a developer needs to hit to match the lending threshold, that the debt service that they need to keep the housing open. So it's more complicated than there's a unit and they're charging too much rent. We need to make sure that they drop their rents, because that's not always cut and dry like that. And so how do we build in a way that when we have units that are available to people, because cost of building is low enough that then the debt service and the financial requirements of that housing do not supersede what people can pay, what rent people can pay.
So Jeff, can I ask you, what does it mean for Tacoma to be in a housing crisis from your perspective?
So it's interesting. So I'm Jeff Dade. I am a triple dog, I think, so they call me. So this is my home away from home here at UW-T. So glad to see such a great turnout. So I have been involved with housing for, I don't know, a little bit over 30 years and in different ways. I won't give you my full bio, but basically financial person, banker, come financial planner to community planner to community developer now. And so when we talk about crisis, I was just listening to Nicholas's, what he was saying, and just thinking about, it's tone deaf, isn't it? When we think about this notion of how, we have enough units, so like this quantitative piece, but there's units, the data says that there's enough, so everyone's fine with no qualitative, with no, and I'd even say, this is kind of my wheelhouse, with no input from community, the folks who need it. No one's asking them. No one's asking us, right? Because part of the models have been for so long that, the powers that be, they are the ones that know. They'll decide. And so part of the burden for us in our housing crisis, where we do have, particularly in Tacoma, I haven't seen the most recent numbers, but we are largely a service economy for folks that are making wages that do not meet and have not met living wages for decades at this point, right? And so all these different prices are out of whack, and in the midst of this housing crisis, which most of us tend to think about, or what we hear about in the news and what folks feel, are like Nicholas was talking about, the lack of supply, where it's one thing to have types of units, and you see new construction, we can see some right here, but for whom? And that's part of the big riddle, because when you have, they're like, oh, people are buying. Which people are buying? Who are you asking? Have you, and then even the ones that you're asking, have they had opportunity? Are those the ones that typically get to answer? Right, so we're talking about equity and equality and overall access. Those things don't mix, and it's very much an entrenched. When we talk about like if you will, the socialization of housing, that's part of our burden too. How we're even ascertaining these answers and talking about how we make solutions is, in a lot of ways, it's really archaic. So I'll start with that type of that answer. Pass it
Yeah.
back.
I also, when you say like, who is it for? I'm like, who lives in 600 square feet with kids? God bless you. I have 3 and there's not enough room in my house ever for the 3 of us. So when, excuse me, what strategy are we using now to address affordability? We talked about kind of the supply side of like, there is more housing going in, and that is a real strategy. But what other strategies are we employing? Or maybe if you know there's a strategy we should be employing that we're not employing. And Anaid, I'm going to start with you again.
So we are employing several strategies. I have the City of Tacoma's Housing Action Plan that I encourage people to look at for like more details and data on what the city is doing about this. But some of it is seeding a housing trust fund as a way to address the housing crisis. We've also looking at updating multifamily tax exemptions to, again, incentivize the construction and support developers in making the bottom line work so that there can be more housing. And I'm gonna go to, I mean, there's a lot of them. There's about 18 or 16 strategies, but I'm gonna say that another one is looking at how to increase density in our city as one of the ways that we can increase the production of housing.
It's one of those things that really scare people, especially if you're a single family home and you live in certain parts of the community. The idea of density, it feels like you're going to dramatically change the fabric of a neighborhood. And I know my mom is, in her 70s, and when we talk about, she lives in Portland, which is dealing with a lot of the same issues, if not more. And when I talk about density, she's like, no, it's going to tear up my neighborhood. And I'm like, but a city can't afford, and I didn't understand this before I worked for a city, but a city can't afford the maintenance on a sprawling city, right? And so the only way that you can have like nice streets and curbs and gutters and sidewalk is through density, by having a lot of people in a smaller place. It makes everything more efficient. But we've been sold this dream of like a yard and a fence, and your neighbors can't see in your house, and you can be outside and no one can see you. And I think those things are like, they're not terrible things, but they're not necessarily for where we're at now in this, in this iteration of society. And so, Jeff, you want to, chime in on some of the strategies that you're working on or that you're advocating for?
For sure, and just really to chime into Tanisha on more of the social part, we're lagging behind with the with regard to what we think what the prize is. Right, especially depending on your history with urban versus suburban areas, exurbs, that kind of thing. But part of this idea of what is the goal, the American dream, I'll go ahead and say it, it's really lagging behind, right? It's this outdated notion, but no one's told us that is that the thing that we should value. I want to put that out there, just like, especially, I don't know if we have online folks too. So yeah, just that everyone question, if you can question internally, if you talk at the dinner table, these kind of things, this is how we move our social fabric. Is that the thing we should value? Why? Right? Do you really want to cut a yard? Oh, I'll go into, I don't want to cut a yard anymore. I had that part of my life, right? I want services. I want to go to the Grand Cinema. I want to do creative class stuff, right? At this point in my life. But these kind of things, I guess that's why it's poignant for me, because the quick and dirty for me is that I grew up military brat, Army, and I saw my families, my father's side in East DC and my mother's side in Fort Washington, Maryland. I saw them have a very different experience, and the house is what made the difference. Owning the home made the difference, right? And I'm one cross-section of Americana, one cross-section of Black families in the Great Migration, these kind of things. But I want to make sure that those, I think so often, that all the pieces, they tend to be, disaggregated. And this human experience, it's one thing and it's multifaceted. And we have to really hold this multiplicity in space. I don't think I answered the question there. But with regard to thinking of those things as a preface, community, what I'm into now, to answer the question that Tanisha put, Community Land Trust. So I'm working with and for and excited about. So I am still an apprentice in the Community Land Trust space, but who I work with, Homestead Community Land Trust, are not. Our group is not. They're part of the reason that I invited and really courted Homestead to come into the Hilltop neighborhood to help complete the work that so many of us have been doing for decades, and not even just us, but like fulfilling what the ancestors and what the folks who live in the neighborhood have said they've wanted with very clearly for years. And it never happens for a multitude of reasons, a lot of them having to do with the color of my skin, right? And that's a different conference maybe, But there's, like I said, there's all these different facets. And as we come together and think about these elements, the reason that I like Community Land Trust is because it begins to, it's one facet. I will say we need a bunch of alternatives to go into the mix. But part of the things that what makes me enamored of Community Land Trust is this notion of having a leasehold, and then that for the land, and then that making the ownership, the collective ownership of the structure, all the sticks, you actually can still own the home, but automatically your price is lower. And then there's the fee structure, really cheap, the payment structure, all those factors in there really answer what we're talking about, having folks, modest income folks, service economy, low assets, because of all the systemic pieces. It can be an answer to folks who the cards say you don't get to even start on this ladder. That's my answer.
And briefly, since you did bring up the American dream, I'd like to go back and start by saying and acknowledging that we are on the unceded land of the Puyallup people. And they've taken care of this land for time immemorial. And we are here after stealing this land, which is a direct tie to this American dream. Why? As a settler colonial state, why did they tell us it was a good idea to have the picket in the yard and that land, right? Like we were invited, encouraged to consume land that wasn't ours as a way to colonize and settle the area, right? So there's a direct link to that, and how we all are participating in that as long as we continue propagating that as the ideal way to be or way to house ourselves and each other, versus promoting more communitarian approaches to housing and shelter.
Amen.
Yeah, it's a long conversation, and it's one that me and Jeff and Anaid have had a lot, actually, because we're both graduates of a program that she teaches in here at UW-T. There's a lot in the American dream concept around housing, and there's a lot there that, frankly, you don't learn in high school, and you don't learn in elementary school, and you learn as a type of person or a class of person that you don't learn as another type of or class of person, right? So me growing up in Gig Harbor as a white male did not learn about the American dream in the same way that Jeff or Anaid did, right? So there's a lot there, and housing policy has long and devastating roots in where we're at now. So we can get more into that or not, but I want to answer the original question, which is the strategies we're using to address housing affordability. I think about this, I like the way that Sightline Institute categorizes this. It's easy to kind of bin out and understand, which is we have supply strategies, we have subsidy strategies, and we have stability strategies. So the supply strategies typically are policy. So Anya, you mentioned the MFT program. There's the middle housing bill that the state has put forward at home in Tacoma, which was a prelude to the affordable or the middle housing bill that is trying to incentivize loosen regulation, implement some kinds of other regulation to influence zoning, land use, and such to increase density in housing types of diversity of housing. That kind of supply work to increase the ability for builders to build something different and to increase that supply. Subsidy addresses the cost of what things cost. We talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Housing costs, both from a maintenance and operations standpoint, both from a building standpoint and a rental standpoint, they're all rising. So how do you alleviate some of that? You provide some sort of subsidy. That subsidy can come in a couple forms, right? It can be an in-kind subsidy with the Community Land Trust, where the Community Land Trust is alleviating the cost of land, right? And sharing the cost of ownership through a communal model. You have potentially loans, right? Low interest loans or loan product of some kind that is trying to fill a market failure in your classic debt service. You have subsidy, general grant subsidy, right? We spend a lot of housing, the year of housing, right? In 2023, in the legislature, we were somewhere in the realm of almost $600 million of direct subsidy from the state into affordable housing programs and opportunities. It's crazy because it's just still not enough, right? It just isn't. I can get into what I think, well, we'll go into stability first. So stability is essentially helping tenants, helping renters. Whether it's relocation support in the new Tacoma for All initiative, or whether it's rental assistance for people who can't afford housing, but maybe they're a month or two behind, but they could catch up. So you provide rental assistance so they don't get evicted. If it's services around eviction services, so that you have a lawyer to counter a bad eviction, or so the stability is trying to maintain an affordability and a metric that allows people to stay in their homes, right? So that's another strategy. All of these are subject, though, and Anaid is completely right about this. She hasn't said it yet, but she is, that we commodify housing, right? And so all of this is under a rubric of we make money on people's shelter, right? So I hesitate to move forward with solutions to this, because the solution to this is to not commodify housing. I'm a realist on this. That shit's just not going to happen. It's like, we want to try to change it, but it's like we are in a system that functions the way the system functions, and so we can help as many people as possible using strategies within the system, or we can work on changing the system, or we can do both, right? I think one giant market failure that I see that I think is a really good strategy to look at from both a acquisition of housing standpoint for, let's say, housing authority, for example, or for developers or builders of housing is the money, right? It costs too much to build. And on the back end, insurance costs are skyrocketing. Maintenance operation costs never go down. And if you are unable to maintain a building that is going to be livable for the tenants in it, then you can't maintain that building, right? And so if we're able to address a market failure, which is essentially the way that we lend and commodify the housing through a financial system, then potentially you get both market rate developers and affordable developers able to lower their costs dramatically if the state is providing, let's call it a 1% loan, right? Yeah. And that loan is able to be not subordinate to another loan, right? You're able to potentially bear those costs out in a way that makes everything more affordable, because you're not trying to hit the debt service that you need to hit to avoid the property being taken away from you by the bank.
Yeah. And I think, so for those that don't know, and Ted's over here with me, yeah,
briefly.
Yeah.
Because I do want to say that, and this helps put things into perspective, dominant culture tends to have a timeline of, 50 years. My lifetime is my timeline. If we look at this system that seems impossible to change has really only been around for 300 years, right? So it is possible to change it. And I would say that the change has already exists. Community Land Trust, as an example, an intermediate step in moving in that direction, are alive and thriving around the country. And it's not because they've completely decommodified housing, but they've taken a step in the direction of housing as somebody who needs shelter. I'm human, so I need a place to live and rest. And so I am not seeing my shelter as an investment, as an asset that will only appreciate, and that the only way to, that for it to make sense for me to kind of get involved in that is because I'm going to make money off of it once I sell it. That is the wrong approach. And that's where I'm like, I think we all, and I know we're going to get to this question in a bit, we all do play a role in this system. And there are many of us and not so many of the people that have just the luxury of saying, I want to live there, close their eyes and just point a finger. That there's far fewer people that have unconstrained, can make unconstrained decisions about housing, and far many of us that are like, wow, I really have to make this puzzle work. And then what am I taking off the table? What am I adding on the table? How do I balance this sheet so that I can have a place to live, continue pursuing maybe my education, feed my kids, go to the doctor every once in a while, like meet my basic human needs, and still remain housed. So I just wanted to add that it's like, it is difficult. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's possible. It's here. We can look into it. We can move towards it. And we all make personal decisions. Like we make decisions that speak to one or the other.
Yeah.
I just want to respond real quick to Anaid. I said there was a market failure. That's not exactly true. The market, it's working as it's intended to work.
Exactly what it's supposed to do.
The
Exactly.
market failure is if we're trying to supply housing, that's the market failure for people, right? Not that we're not able to make money on housing. That is working just fine, right? So I just want to make that distinction that the market failure is if we're trying to house people, then we're missing, we're missing a piece in the market that's actually doing that work, right? So.
But I think that's a really important distinction for like, in terms of what regular people can do, who can't write policy, who don't build houses. Like we make choices every day. We make choices about where do we go to shop and do they pay a livable wage? Are we willing to pay a little bit more for at a place that pays a housing wage in Tacoma? Are we willing to, when we get ready to sell our house, not sell our house for the maximum profit, but for what the house is worth and no more? Are we willing to make those types of choices for the collective benefit of everyone? Or are we still in the mindset of this is how I create generational wealth for my family is by, most of us are not in a position to hoard land, but there are people in our society that can actually hoard land and have 4 and 5 houses when other people can't have 1 house. And there's the ideas of how do we create communities in which people can age in place. I'm not always going to need 2,400 square feet. I don't need it now. My last kid's graduating from college in a year. But I don't necessarily want to leave Steilacoom. But there are no other options in Steilacoom for me to buy a smaller condo house in Steilacoom. So then I have to make choices about, do I stay in a house that's much bigger than what I need or what I want to maintain? Because I'm like Jeff, I'm done with yards. Y'all can have it. Or do I, or am I stuck there? And I think that we've created this kind of confine for housing where people are either forced to move places they don't necessarily want to move because that's where they can afford, or they're stuck staying in houses they don't really need because there's not other options. And then we have the whole predatory side, which we don't even need to talk about. But I moved into my father's house. My father would be 90 this year. He's passed away now. But for the first year I moved into the house that I grew up in, I had someone calling me every day offering me $300,000 in cash to buy the house because my dad bought the house for $50,000. And this is an older gentleman who's not necessarily completely aware of what housing costs now. And he might decide, because he had medical bills and cancer and all these other things, I'm going to sell this house for $300,000 and never be able to find another house to live in because he couldn't afford anything around for that amount of money. So, and no, step off my soapbox now. So as one of the co-writers of the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, when we were going through that process, there was a lot of things that some seemed very easy, some seemed very hard, some seemed way out in the future, and some seemed like we could do right away. And one of the things that we landed on pretty quickly is the idea of density. And in the first round of Home in Tacoma, which I was still there for that part, There were a lot of people who were very upset about that, and there was a lot of very intense, heated meetings, right? I stepped out. I went to the school district. I let Ted hold this one. Now that we're getting closer to what does density mean? What does that look like for the city of Tacoma? There are, like I said earlier, there are people that are really nervous and scared about what that means. Can you, for a second, talk about, how does density promote affordability, and what happens if we don't increase density? And Jeff, I'm going to start with you.
I have so many thoughts on that, but I won't give them all to you now. With density, we're talking about scale. As if you have looked at the growth perspective in Washington anytime soon, recently, it's not going down. People love Washington, Western Washington in particular, like we do. It's only going up. So if we don't have density, what does that do? We're going to have we're going to continue, and this is part of the burden too, even as we figure out, me being into community land trust now, one of the comments I get often is that there are other ones and isn't that competition. And I always have to squash that. Y'all, whatever success we get, it is not enough. This has to be viral. This is a model. This has to be something that is widespread because scale is important. If we get onesie twosie, and that's where we're at right now, we're showing, the modeling locally. That's part of my job to show, like, hey, it works, y'all. And not that it does. We've had that. Like Tanisha said, it's around the country. It's not new. Sorry, Anaid, you said that. They're not new ideas per se, but locally, when we have this fear around the NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, because it scares me, because what I've been told is that if we have anything that looks different than what we've always had, my value is going to go down, the neighborhood's going to go to hell, my kids are not going to be safe, all these different things socially. And so for me, I'm part of my scholarship and just really my passion, my interest is, you'll always hear me go back to the social part because it's a major obstacle as far as I'm concerned, because that's, even when you have the numbers working for you, it's the spirit and this mental space where we have these blockages, like you're threatening me. And I should be able to have this because my granddaddy had this and everybody else had this, right? And it's not that you're wrong. If y'all hear me, because I know somebody in the interwebs is getting mad at me right now for saying these things because you're getting threatened, right? Please don't be threatened. You're not wrong. This is not saying that the things that you're doing are wrong. It's saying that we have these values that are entrenched, that somebody told us, somebody reared us on these ideas. And if you're in the Cascades and we figure out how to build homes in the mountains that people want to go to and we can commute, things like that, none of this is an issue, right? I mean, there's sprawl notwithstanding, that's major sprawl, right? But there's other ideas, but what we're talking about when we do density is how do we stay in the places where we have services already? And we have, I think most of you agree, like we have all these great services that we can get at. When you go up, you can spread the wealth better. And you're talking about a quality of life for everyone, that everyone gets to share. And this is stuff that we all know, but we don't tend to, when we have the conversations around density, those things kind of magically don't come in as far as like everyone's quality of life. And it goes back to this, I'll end with saying this, the zero sum game, this idea like, well, if you have something good, that means I must be losing something. If I have it and you start coming in there, you're taking it from somewhere, and we don't like that because we've always had this. And this is this kind of fallacy, this mythological thinking. Well, perhaps there was a time when, I'll pass this, maybe it's a good segue. There's a time where that needs to be paramount, right? Now with density, we have more folks coming. And if we don't have density, if we don't have housing, if we don't figure out modes of living that cater to or give access to modest income, the majority of folks, then how do I say this? I'm trying to be gentle with saying this. We already have problems with that now, where folks aren't housed. Can you imagine if that were quintupled? That's the future for your children. Is that okay with you? And that's where our kind of interest nexus can intersect, because regardless of your class and your demographic, if you're in space together, that's something where we can come together on that. We got to do something with the space that's finite.
And I think, I mean, it's a mindset, right? Like there are people who want all the services and amenities of being in a city, but also want the conveniences and the white picket fences of the suburb. And Tacoma is one of those cities that, because we've spread, the way we spread, you kind of have both in the same place. Like nobody in New York is caring about a yard. Like if you can't be in New York and care about a yard, you gotta go way out to get a yard, right? And so we didn't develop that way. We developed kind of as a hybrid city suburb. And I think that's what people are trying to hold on to and are afraid that they're going to lose something by moving into the direction of the actual kind of city that we actually are becoming. And with, like Jeff said, with the projections of who's going to move to Tacoma and the choices people are going to make about Tacoma because of the cost of Seattle and some of the other places, you know, what happens to Tacoma. So, Anaid.
I'm going to go back to the conversation where Jeff left it, and then maybe I'll try to join your conversation too. But I was back in the supply and demand of land. So the question being, how does density promote affordability? So our land is finite, and I'm specifically mentioning it as like the city of Tacoma has a finite amount of land. And I think it's easy to visualize because, you know, we have a lot of water on some of our edges. And so it's clear that we're not just going to start building on islands or like on floating. We've tried and we've seen what's happened in those areas that are on stilts. It's not the best approach to permanent, stable housing. And definitely not affordable at all because it's much more expensive to try to build when you were already contending with seawater level rising. So it's like that, you know, you're building temporarily, no matter how much money you put into it. So, you know, density supports housing affordability because it provides access to more housing with less use of this finite resource, which is land. We don't get more land just because we have more residents, but we use the land more efficiently. That provides access to better quality of life for more folks. And for individuals that might be concerned with, well, that'll make traffic worse. I'd say actually higher density can improve traffic because it can improve access to services within walking distance. So you don't need to get in your car to go to the grocery store. It improves access to better transportation services. And as you walked in, if you missed it, there was a sign-in sheet that asked you what is the mode of transportation you use to get here, which would have been your preferred mode of transportation. And I will tell you that in my case, there is a disconnect. I drove here, I would have preferred to take public transit. And then it asks you like, what would need to be improved? Well, what would need to be improved for me would be the efficiency to this public transit, because I did not have the extra hour it would have taken me to get from, 19th down that way to get here on time. And so having more density increases demand for these services and makes the argument in favor of creating more services higher, as well as promotes the availability of the resources needed to fund those services. So we all share a little bit of the cost of having access to better transportation, public transit approaches, more bike lanes, more sidewalks. Again, then all of a sudden, we are condensing our demand for resources in these areas that can also be better supported by, okay, now we're going to focus on these areas need to have or get priority in having access to services and better roads and better sidewalks, better bike lanes to move around.
Nick, I'm going to ask you to chime in, and then we've got lots of questions from the audience, so we're probably going to
Wrap it up. Huh?
We're gonna jump into those.
Before I talk about density, I just want to note something Jeff said around the zero sum mindset. I often think about why people are so damn scared of like their stuff, don't take it. And I think it goes back to something Anaid talked about, which is our history, our zero-sum mentality is a response to our history's own actions, right? Like, we came westward and we stole everything. And there was zero-sum for us in that regard. And our history since has been trying to maintain that, hold that, deal with, the trauma about what actually happened. And so that's where that zero-sum comes from. It's a different world now. It's a different reality, but I think that inherent, real deep systemic actions, sticks with us as a community, right? That's that when you're taught the American dream growing up and what's due you, and it's all stems from the fact that we took it and we didn't take it well. So just want to note that. Regarding density and how does it promote affordability, everything that Ani had said is correct, and Jeff both. I want to note too that increasing density isn't just about increasing the unit count and density around how many units, but it's also the diversity of units, the kind of units, right? People, we noted, as Tanisha noted, families need more than 600 square feet, right? But a student doesn't, right? So what we're talking about here is choice. Are we relegated to live someplace where only this kind of housing is allowed, or are we trying to create a system where we can spread out costs and wealth and availability and diversity of housing, so that people that want to move to the North End have an opportunity to do so, because it's not just single family homes, right? So it both increases the density to help with the supply and the cost and kind of the logistical mechanisms that create housing stability, but it also is just a better social construct to get more kinds of people in a diversity of housing and livelihoods living together in an area, which thereby will eventually alleviate that zero-sum fear that we all have around, if there's you're going to put a giant apartment complex in my backyard and I'm going to have, I don't know, people throwing stuff at me from the balconies. I don't know. There's a lot of things people think about, but if it's done smartly, and I think Tacoma is a really great model for how they've really thought about taking into community comments and creating an impactful plan that also adjusts for arterials and kind of the density increases as you get closer, but decreases so that you don't have a 150 unit apartment complex in somebody's single family backyard, right? That you try to get that middle housing, and I know I'm tired of hearing middle housing too. It's been it's like it's the new sustainable or resilient, right? It's just but it's true that scale and the way that scale moves up in density or down in density makes a lot of sense, especially when we're trying to acclimate to the new world that we live in with the populations that we have. So it expands those opportunities, and from a practical standpoint, and Ani got to this a little bit as well. It's if we don't increase density, then the gaps between costs are going up. We already talked about this, and costs rarely go down, right? The inflation rate goes down, but costs go up, right? Well, the city, I don't know if you've heard, every budget cycle, the city has a budget issue, right? There is no way to increase revenue for the things that we all need and want if we are not increasing the ability for people to move to this city, right?
Absolutely.
So if we're not increasing density and increasing the availability of housing for people to live where they want to live, they'll go someplace where they can. And then that revenue goes away, and then all of your pretty lawns and streets still can't get paid for, right? So it's a financial incentive for all of us to embrace smart density, both from a housing affordability and diversity standpoint, but also just because we need to have the ability to function as a city, and this is a way to provide that ongoing functioning.
All right.
Hey, I wanted to give a lens real quick that I forgot to say. So when we talk about this fear piece, always, if I can bring it up into your mind, tuck behind your ear as we go forward, this idea of, y'all know that we're in this loneliness epidemic, and think about how that connects to community or not, and how what we accept as community is my neighbor. We could be neighbors today, and this may not have been the case 20 years ago, right? And I don't know you at all. Like, you stay over there, I stay over here. I kind of wave sometimes, but really we're separate. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, by the way. I want to lift it up so you can think about what your story is with this too. Think about that, the loneliness piece, and then this term, WIFM, WIFM, what's in it for me, right? The WIFM. So if you can put those together, and there's a connection that I think is really accessible for all of us to kind of touch with that kind of sandwich.
Yeah. So we're gonna try to do a speed round. What does affordable housing mean? And I know this is a very complicated thing. So I think when people hear affordable housing and when we talk about it from the lens of the city, it is a very specific number that is a calculation. And then there is, what is affordable housing, the real answer? And Nick, I'm gonna let you answer this one.
This is teed up for me. Affordable housing is such a weird conundrum. So typically we think of affordable as a level of housing that somebody is able to access if they have 80% of the annual median income in whatever city and or county that you're talking about. And of that income, that 80% income, so the housing is priced at 80%, but you're not paying more than 30% of your income to that housing. So that delta is categorized as what legally affordable housing is. Now that's a giant problem because guess what? It's not affordable, right? Like, it's still super expensive, especially when your wages do not go up commensurate with all the other costs we're talking about. So there's two ways to think about affordable housing. One is how we designate it so that we can build and provide subsidy and supply and stability through a policy or financial mechanisms. But the other one is exactly like what actually is affordable. And a lot of times, even our metrics of affordability don't translate to real affordability in the world. And so it's tough. So that question is actually unanswerable in a lot of ways, but that is technically how we define it.
Yep. All right, Jeff, quick answer. What are the barriers to community land, what the community land trusts are facing?
I didn't expect that one. Funding, money,
Oh, yeah.
the kind of definitions, folks being unfamiliar with the model, and it just sounds like some foo-foo thing. Maybe it's not real. So part of my work, our work together, is to get the education, and that touches the money too, because we need the funders to understand what we're doing and that it's real and that it can work.
Right. So someone has excess land, who can't afford to build or do anything with it. Like, is there an opportunity there for them to help with something like that?
I see you. Great. What I will say, so you all will hear in the web universe and locally especially, you will hear one of my group's answers. It's going to be a new land trust called Aya. That is going to focus, that's really focused on Pierce County. Our starting pilot will be in Hilltop. That is what we're working on. And to answer Tanisha's question, part of the footprint, one of the great things about a community land trust is that this entity does not have to be contiguous, right? So you can have different places around. I really want to get in over to the east side, for example, right? That's really important to me because my personal history and the folks that I know, right? So there will be space for folks, because I get this a lot and I love it so much, but I don't have an answer yet because we're not ready. We're still building it the right way because equity is a big deal for us. But for folks to say, I have land, I want to do this community land trust thing. How do I do it? There's going to be a mode for that, and to do it affordably, and we'll talk about what those definitions should be on a case-by-case basis.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. And Anaid, what do you think about rent control? It was the number one thing that when we first released the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, everybody was like, rent control, unconstitutional in the state of Washington. So what do you think about it?
I mean,
What
that's a cool question. I think it depends on who you are, what you feel about it. Like, if I'm a landlord, I probably dislike the sound of rent control. And if I'm somebody struggling to make ends meet and remain housed, I like the sound of rent control. I think it's it's like a brute tool. Like it's like the big hammer to try to fix maybe an even bigger problem. So I can support it in the right spaces with the right people. And I would not try to, have a huge disagreement with someone who has all of the rational and financial explanations as to why rent control doesn't work for them as a landlord, as somebody who's trying to provide housing. I think that the fact that the conversation of rent control has gotten to the level that it has in the last couple of legislative cycles, not just this one, is a tell of how bad things are. So when we passed blanket legislation such as we're going to ban this approach to providing a safety net for individuals in a community, things must be going really well for us. Because that happens, that passes with less struggle, less resistance. Right now, it's the majority of us dealing with the pressures and the disadvantaged position saying, well, some things got to change. And if that means I need to change my state constitution, well, where do I sign up? So I'm in favor of there being many approaches. And I think rent control is one of them. And the fact that it's unconstitutional has tied the hands of municipalities to take some actions. It's not the only one. It's not going to fix the problem, but it is one of the many things that could happen to provide support for there being a mix of incomes in our cities. We do not want our cities to continue moving in the direction that they currently are, which is becoming more and more segregated, not just by income, which then leads to segregation by race, by background, by what the types of jobs we have. So our communities need to be better integrated, and having tools such as rent control is a way to move in that direction.
Perfect. Nick, why don't we see more affordable mixed-use developments and have the recent increase in multifamily developments had any impact on rent?
I can't believe you gave Anaid a lightning round of rent control. That's very nice. Okay, so can you say the question again? Sorry?
Why don't we see more affordable mixed-use developments and have the recent multifamily developments had any impact on rents?
Okay, so I'll answer the first one first. Why haven't we seen more mixed-use affordable developments? There are quite a few relative to the overall development going on. The problem that you're not seeing more is a couple things, right? One is mixed use connotes that there is there's some commercial space and residential space. Commercial space is really expensive to build and maintain and ensure that there are adequate revenues coming through on the back end to pay your loans off to build. So affordable housers are not good at commercial. And so often you see difficulties finding partners who are willing to manage and operate and take the risk associated with the commercial space on the ground floor separate that from what the affordable housers know, which is how to do residential and operations and maintenance. Along with that, typically not necessarily through code, although sometimes you need more parking with commercial than you do with residential in the same building. You have to provide for if you want commercial to be successful, you need to allow people to be there and go, right? Correct. Yeah. And so often you have people who are running commercial spaces, they have a market, they have in their head a market need for what parking they need for people to get there, park and access those commercial spaces. That means that parking typically on site expands past the residential parking that you want to do. Parking garages are also very expensive. So those are two main components. Another component is Y'all, it is really expensive to build affordable housing. Like stupidly more expensive than it is to build not affordable housing. We do not have enough time to get into this, but it's one of my like real passions. Like you can build in the city of Tacoma right now, a market rate unit for $250,000 to $300,000 a unit, all said and done, depending on what your building is, right? Affordable units, designated affordable units that you have subsidy from the federal government or the state or whatever in. Right now at Housing Hilltop up the street here, we're pushing $515,000 a unit. And our new, I'll give you a little insight here. One of our new projects that we're looking at moving forward, we're hitting $600,000 per unit of cost. So we are more than doubling what the private market can do. That is why it's really hard to pencil also a giant commercial space and parking,
Right.
because there is just not enough money. And you got to remember, we're building affordably, which means we are not getting the rents that market rate people are getting in their, right? It is a math problem that is not solvable without different financial mechanisms to get housing built.
And with that, we are at time. But we'll be here for like 30 seconds more. So, you know, for people in the room, you can come up and maybe get the end of that answer. I told you we were going to run out of time. I knew this was going to be a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you guys learned something today and hope this conversation was good for you. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see you guys again next year for the round of Friday forums. Thanks.
All right, as people are leaving, I'm going to tell you just a couple of things. Folks on Zoom, you didn't hear the round of applause for our panelists, but thank you so much to our panelists and to our moderator, Tanisha. Tanisha's been our moderator for many years now, and she is like the heart of these forums. So thank you. I want to let you all know a recording of this is available on Downtown on the Go's website, probably on Monday. And also to let you know that Downtown on the Go is celebrating 15 years of our Walk Tacoma program this year. We've got information at the back table or at downtownonthego.org. We are past time, so I'm going to stop there, but thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you at the next event. Thanks.